In the 41st millennium, there are no miracles, only the grinding calculus of survival, the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated darkness, and the slow death of hope. Faith has replaced reason. Superstition has devoured science. The Imperium of man, once humanity's shining future, has become a corpse empire sustained by the sacrifice of its own creator. For 10 millennia, the God Emperor of mankind has sat immobile upon the golden throne, his consciousness scattered across the warp, his body a desiccated husk fed by the souls of 1,000 psychers daily. The Imperium believes he watches over them. They are wrong. He has been dying, inch by inch, for longer than most civilizations have existed. But what happens when the impossible occurs, when the deity who never wanted worship opens his eyes once more? If you crave stories where the foundations of the 41st millennium crack and reality itself must be rewritten, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the Dark Millennium's most catastrophic transformation. The first sign was silence. For 10,000 years, the Golden Throne had hummed with the screaming resonance of souls being consumed, a perpetual chorus of psychic agony that echoed through the Emperor's palace like a heartbeat. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus had calibrated their rituals to that sound. Custodians had measured their watch rotations by its rhythm. It was the sound of the Imperium's survival, terrible, necessary, eternal. Then, at 23:47:9 Terran Standard, the humming stopped. Captain General Trajan Valoris was in the lock shield gallery when every piece of auramite armor in the chamber of the Golden Throne suddenly blazed with reflected light. Not the dull amber glow of the Astronomicon, but something else, something older. The Vox network erupted with confused reports from the 10,000. Impossible readings, psychic pressure building like a star about to collapse. Valoris ran. A custodian does not run. They advance with measured purpose, every movement calculated for maximum efficiency. But the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes ran through the halls of the Imperial Palace, his guardian spear clutched in hands that had not trembled in 4 centuries of service. The throne room's adamantium doors stood open. They had not been opened in living memory, sealed by decree, accessible only through the ritual corridors where tech priests performed their endless maintenance. Now they gaped wide, and golden light poured through them like liquid dawn. Valoris stepped through and fell to one knee instantly, instinctively. The Golden Throne still held its occupant, but everything had changed. Where withered flesh had barely clung to ancient bone, muscle now pressed against skin that gleamed with renewed vitality. The life support tubes still pierced his form, but they seemed suddenly obscene, parasites clinging to something that no longer needed them. The psychic hood still covered his skull, but beneath it, Valoris could see eyes, open eyes. Eyes that had witnessed the birth of human civilization, that had stared down demons and Xenos empires, that had watched his own sons tear the galaxy apart. Eyes that now fixed upon Valoris with an intensity that made the custodian's centuries of mental conditioning feel like paper before fire. How long? The voice was not sound. It bypassed ears entirely, resonating directly in Valoris's mind with the weight of continental plates grinding together. 10,000 years, master of mankind. Valoris's voice did not shake. It was perhaps his greatest achievement. The Emperor's expression, barely visible through the machinery, did not change. But the temperature in the throne room dropped 10 degrees in an instant, and somewhere far above, in the upper atmosphere of Terra, storm clouds began to gather for the first time in millennia. "Show me," the Emperor commanded. "Show me what they have built on my corpse." The Emperor's consciousness expanded outward like a tidal wave of golden fire. Valoris remained kneeling, his transhuman physiology barely withstanding the psychic pressure that now radiated from the golden throne. This was not the diffuse, scattered presence that had maintained the Astronomicon for 10,000 years. This was focused, conscious, awake, and it was looking at what humanity had become. The Emperor's perception raced across Terra first, through the hive spires where trillions huddled in darkness, through the factorums where children were fed into machinery, through the cathedral of the Savior Emperor, where priests preached his divinity to weeping masses. He saw the ecclesiarchy's gilded monuments built with the taxes of starving worlds. He witnessed inquisitors burning entire populations for suspected taint. He observed the High Lords of Terra squabbling over privileges while supply lines to dying worlds were administratively delayed. Then his sight pushed beyond Terra into the Imperium itself. 1,000,000 worlds, 1,000,000,000 battlefields, countless souls screaming his name as they died, not in defiant hope, but in desperate religious fervor. Sisters of battle immolating themselves in acts of holy martyrdom. Guard regiments charging fortifications with sharpened stakes and faith instead of proper equipment. Forge worlds where the understanding of technology had degraded into superstitious ritual. And everywhere, the Aquila, his symbol, his mark, clutched by people who whispered prayers to a god he had explicitly forbidden them to worship. In the throne room, the machinery began to crack, not from malfunction, but from the sheer psychic force building within its primary occupant. Golden lightning arced between the pylons. Several tech priests attending the throne's peripheral systems simply ceased functioning, their minds overwhelmed by proximity to a consciousness that had endured the full, terrible truth of what his dream had become. Valoris forced himself to speak. "Master, the throne is a prison." The Emperor's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "They have made me a prisoner. They have made themselves slaves, and they call it holy." The Emperor's fingers twitched, the first physical movement in 10 millennia beyond simple breathing. The movement was slight, barely perceptible, but the consequences were immediate. 3 of the life support cables tore free, spraying sacred oils across marble that had never been stained. Alarms shrieked throughout the palace complex. In the Astronomicon chamber, 300 psychers collapsed simultaneously as the psychic load they channeled suddenly shifted. "How many?" the Emperor asked, and Valoris knew immediately what he meant. 1,000 psychers per day, Master, fed to the throne to maintain the Astronomicon and sustain your... He hesitated. "My corpse," the Emperor finished. 365,000 souls per Terran year, for 10,000 years. The mathematical conclusion hung unspoken in the air. 3.65 billion human psychers consumed. And still you let the galaxy burn because you could not imagine anything beyond survival. "We had no choice." Valoris said it without defensiveness, simply stating fact. "Without the Astronomicon, the Imperium falls. Without you, humanity dies. Without me, humanity would have been forced to evolve." The Emperor's psychic presence intensified, and Valoris felt rather than heard the unspoken thought behind those words. Perhaps that would have been better. Another cable snapped, then another. The Golden Throne's machine spirit, if it still possessed such a thing after millennia of desperate repairs, wailed in binary protest. But the Emperor was beyond its constraints now. His body, atrophied by ages, began to regenerate at a visible rate. Muscle fibers knitted, skin regained its bronze hue. The change was agonizingly slow by his standards. His perpetual nature had been suppressed for so long that recovery would take time, but unstoppable nonetheless. "Captain General," the Emperor's gaze fixed on Valoris again, "summon the High Lords of Terra. Summon the representatives of the Ecclesiarchy." Summon every person who has claimed authority in my name. The psychic weight of the command was undeniable, but Valorous had served for centuries. He knew what such a summons would trigger. Master, if they learn you have awakened, the political upheaval alone could— Let them come, the Emperor interrupted. Let them see what their god thinks of their prayers. The Senatorum Imperialis had not convened in emergency session with such speed in living memory. The 12 High Lords of Terra arrived within hours, each accompanied by retinues of advisors, scribes, and armed guards. Though what protection such forces could offer in the Imperial Palace, none could say. Old habits and older paranoia died hard. Lord Commander Militant Aristide Vol arrived first, his dress uniform immaculate despite the haste. The master of the Administratum, Violetta Roskova, came surrounded by data slates and servitors. The Fabricator General's hololithic proxy materialized precisely on time, its binary count already calculating probabilities. One by one, they assembled in the Chamber of Thrones, ornate seats arranged in a circle that had once held actual power before Guilliman's return had complicated matters. None of them knew why they had been summoned. The message had come from Captain General Valorous himself, sealed with authority that could not be ignored. Attend immediately. The fate of the Imperium demands it. Ecclesiarch Demos Sisidint was the last to arrive, his ceremonial robes dragging across marble floors. He moved with the weight of someone who commanded the faith of trillions, who could declare crusades with a word. This disruption is highly irregular, he announced to the chamber. I was conducting the ceremony of— The Emperor is awake. Valorous stood at the chamber's center, his auramite armor still gleaming with residual psychic energy from the throne room. The words fell like an executioner's blade. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Then pandemonium. Impossible, the Fabricator General's proxy crackled. The throne's readings show no variance beyond acceptable parameters. This is either malfunction or heresy. Heresy? Deimos Sixsevian's face flushed crimson. How dare you speak of the God Emperor's awakening as— He is not a god. Valorous' voice cut through the chaos like a power sword. And he is awake, not merely conscious, not simply aware. He has opened his eyes, he has spoken, and he has opinions about what you have built in his name. Lord Commander Vol leaned forward, his tactical mind already racing through implications. If this is true, we need to establish control of information immediately. News of this magnitude would trigger uprisings, schisms, potential civil war. The Ministorum alone. The Ministorum is about to have a crisis far more immediate than civil war, Valorous interrupted. He wants to see you, all of you. Now, the Ecclesiarch's expression transformed from outrage to something approaching religious ecstasy. The God Emperor grants us audience. After 10,000 years, he deigns to speak with his faithful servants. Tears began streaming down his face. I must prepare the hymns of awakening, the rites of— There will be no rites. Valorous' tone carried a warning that even the Ecclesiarch could not miss. And I suggest you prepare yourselves for the possibility that he is displeased. Roskova, the master of the Administratum, had been silent throughout the exchange. Now she spoke, her voice carrying the dry pragmatism of someone who had spent decades navigating Byzantine politics. Displeased with what, specifically? Valorous met her gaze. Everything. The word hung in the air like poison. Vol's hand moved unconsciously to his sidearm. The Fabricator General's proxy flickered with agitated binary. Demos Sixsevian looked as though he might faint, because they all understood in that moment what Valorous was truly saying. For 10,000 years, the Imperium had been a machine running on momentum and desperation. The High Lords had convinced themselves they were stewards of the Emperor's vision. The ecclesiarchy had built an entire religion around his divinity. The administratum had created systems of control that spanned the galaxy, and none of it, not one piece of the vast, sprawling, brutal edifice they had constructed, had required his actual approval, because he had been silent, dying, unable to judge them. That had just changed. "Take us to him," Vol said quietly. The soldier in him recognized the situation. They were already defeated. The only question was how they would face it. Valorous turned toward the door. "Follow me. And High Lords?" He paused. "When you stand before the Golden Throne, you will kneel. Not because protocol demands it, but because if you don't, the psychic pressure will force you to your knees anyway. Better to choose it." They walked through corridors that suddenly felt like a condemned man's final march, and somewhere ahead, in the heart of the Imperial Palace, something that had once been a man and was now something infinitely more dangerous waited to pass judgment on 10,000 years of failure. The Senatorum Imperialis had not convened in emergency session with such speed in living memory. The 12 High Lords of Terra arrived within hours, each accompanied by retinues of advisors, scribes, and armed guards. Though what protection such forces could offer in the Imperial Palace, none could say. Old habits and older paranoia died hard. Lord Commander Militant Aristide Vol arrived first, his dress uniform immaculate despite the haste. The master of the administratum, Violetta Roskova, came surrounded by data slates and servitors. The Fabricator General's hololithic proxy materialized precisely on time, its binary cont already calculating probabilities. One by one, they assembled in the Chamber of Thrones, ornate seats arranged in a circle that had once held actual power before Guilliman's return had complicated matters. None of them knew why they had been summoned. The message had come from Captain General Valoris himself, sealed with authority that could not be ignored. "Attend immediately. The fate of the Imperium demands it." Ecclesiarch Demos Sisidint was the last to arrive, his ceremonial robes dragging across marble floors. He moved with the weight of someone who commanded the faith of trillions, who could declare crusades with a word. "This disruption is highly irregular," he announced to the chamber. "I was conducting the ceremony of... The Emperor is awake." Valoris stood at the chamber's center, his auramite armor still gleaming with residual psychic energy from the throne room. The words fell like an executioner's blade. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Then pandemonium. "Impossible," the Fabricator General's proxy crackled. "The throne's readings show no variance beyond acceptable parameters. This is either malfunction or heresy." "Heresy?" Deimos Sixsevian's face flushed crimson. "How dare you speak of the God Emperor's awakening as... He is not a god." Valoris's voice cut through the chaos like a power sword. "And he is awake, not merely conscious, not simply aware. He has opened his eyes, he has spoken, and he has opinions about what you have built in his name." Lord Commander Vol leaned forward, his tactical mind already racing through implications. "If this is true, we need to establish control of information immediately. News of this magnitude would trigger uprisings, schisms, potential civil war. The Ministorum alone. The Ministorum is about to have a crisis far more immediate than civil war," Valoris interrupted. "He wants to see you. All of you. Now." The ecclesiarch's expression transformed from outrage to something approaching religious ecstasy. "The God Emperor grants us audience. After 10,000 years, he deigns to speak with his faithful servants." Tears began streaming down his face. "I must prepare the hymns of awakening, the rites of..." "There will be no rites." Valoris's tone carried a warning that even the ecclesiarch could not miss. and I suggest you prepare yourselves for the possibility that he is displeased. Roskova, the master of the administratum, had been silent throughout the exchange. Now she spoke, her voice carrying the dry pragmatism of someone who had spent decades navigating Byzantine politics. Displeased with what, specifically? Valoris met her gaze. Everything. The word hung in the air like poison. Vol's hand moved unconsciously to his sidearm. The Fabricator General's proxy flickered with agitated binary. Deimos Vassis Sevin looked as though he might faint, because they all understood in that moment what Valoris was truly saying. For 10,000 years, the Imperium had been a machine running on momentum and desperation. The High Lords had convinced themselves they were stewards of the Emperor's vision. The Ecclesiarchy had built an entire religion around his divinity. The Administratum had created systems of control that spanned the galaxy, and none of it, not one piece of the vast, sprawling, brutal edifice they had constructed, had required his actual approval, because he had been silent, dying, unable to judge them. That had just changed. "Take us to him," Vol said quietly. The soldier in him recognized the situation. They were already defeated. The only question was how they would face it. Valoris turned toward the door. "Follow me. And High Lords?" He paused. "When you stand before the Golden Throne, you will kneel. Not because protocol demands it, but because if you don't, the psychic pressure will force you to your knees anyway. Better to choose it." They walked through corridors that suddenly felt like a condemned man's final march, and somewhere ahead in the heart of the Imperial Palace, something that had once been a man and was now something infinitely more dangerous waited to pass judgment on 10,000 years of failure. Guilliman. The Fabricator General's hololithic proxy flickered with agitated interest. "The Lord Commander has communed with you? When? How extensively?" "He visited 6 weeks ago," the Emperor said, and his tone carried something almost approaching fondness, regret. The High Lords could not quite parse it. "My son, my logistician, my most practical child. He stood where you stand now and told me that the Imperium had become a rotting corpse animated by faith and bureaucracy. He was not wrong." Valoris shifted slightly, the only indication of his surprise. If Guilliman had gained audience with the Emperor, the Captain General should have known. Unless the Primarch had found another way into the throne room, or unless the Emperor had reached out psychically despite his imprisonment. "What did you tell him?" Vol asked carefully. "I told him nothing. I could not. My consciousness was scattered, maintaining the Astronomicon, holding back the tide of the warp from consuming Terra itself." The Emperor's hands gripped the armrests of the golden throne, and the metal groaned. "But I listened. I heard every word of his frustration, his disgust, his desperate attempts to reform an empire that fights him at every turn, and I heard him weep when he thought no one could witness it." The image hung in the air. Robut Guilliman, the avenging son, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, weeping before his father's corpse. Several of the High Lords looked uncomfortable. Guilliman's return had already disrupted their power structures. Learning that he had the Emperor's ear, even a silent one, shifted calculations considerably. "The Primarch does not understand the necessity of faith," Ecclesiarch Deimos said, recovering some of his conviction. "He is a warrior and administrator, yes, but he lacks the spiritual dimension that binds our people. Master, surely you see that humanity requires..." "Requires what?" The Emperor's voice cut like a blade. "Requires lies? Requires priests who grow fat on tithes while worlds starve. Requires saints whose miracles are simply uncontrolled psycho manifestations given religious context." He leaned forward, and the movement sent cracks spider-webbing through the throne's structure. I am not a god, Ecclesiarch. I never was. I am a man, a very old, very powerful man, but still a man. And you have built a religion around my suffering. But the miracles, Deimos protested, are the warp responding to collective human belief. The Emperor's shout was not sound but psychic force, and it drove everyone except Valoris to their knees again. Do you understand what you have done? You have made me a chaos god, not of ruin, perhaps, but of stagnation and suffering. Every prayer sent my way feeds that construct. Every martyr who dies screaming my name strengthens it. You have created exactly what I fought to prevent. A psychic entity in the warp that wears my face and devours human souls. The words landed like an orbital bombardment. The implications cascaded through each mind present. If the Emperor was right, if the Imperial cult had created a warp presence in his image, then the distinction between the God Emperor and the Chaos Gods became dangerously thin. Roscova's analytical mind seized on the problem first. If that's true, Master, then removing the Imperial cult doesn't solve the problem. The entity in the warp already exists. It's sustained by the faith of trillions. You could denounce your divinity from every world in the Imperium, and the belief would persist. The psychic construct would remain. Which means, Vol added grimly, that we're trapped. The faith that binds the Imperium also creates the very thing you despise. But without that faith, the Imperium collapses. It's a paradox with no solution. The Emperor closed his eyes, and for a moment, the godlike being on the throne looked almost human, tired, ancient, burdened by the weight of 10,000 years of unintended consequences. There is a solution, he said finally, but you will not like it. Master, Valoris spoke for the first time since entering. What would you have us do? The Emperor opened his eyes again, and they blazed with golden light. I will address the Imperium directly. Every world, every ship, every human soul capable of hearing me. I will speak through the Astronomicon itself, and I will tell them the truth, that I am not a god, that the Imperial cult is a lie, that humanity's salvation lies not in prayer but in reason, science, and unity of purpose. The chamber erupted in objections. Deimos looked stricken, as though his entire existence had been invalidated. Roscova was already calculating the administrative nightmare such an announcement would create. Vol's military mind raced through scenarios of planetary rebellions and civil war. The Fabricator General's proxy simply stated in flat binary. Probability of Imperium survival following such action, 23.4%. You will destroy us, Deimos whispered. The people need their faith. Without it, hope dies. Then let them find new hope, the Emperor said, in themselves, in each other. In the future, humanity can still build if they would stop looking backward to a god who never wanted their worship. He stood then, and the golden throne screamed in protest. Cables snapped, machinery exploded, alarms wailed throughout the palace. But the Emperor stood free of the throne for the first time in 10 millennia, and he was glorious and terrible in equal measure. Prepare the Vox networks, he commanded. In 3 days I will speak, and the Imperium will hear truth, whether it destroys them or saves them. The Emperor's declaration sent the High Lords scrambling. 3 days to prepare for the most significant broadcast in 10,000 years. 3 days to either prevent catastrophe or embrace it. The chamber emptied quickly, each High Lord racing to their respective domains to begin something. Damage control, preparation, perhaps even sabotage. Only Valoris remained, standing at attention as the Emperor took his first unsteady steps away from the golden throne. The immortal regeneration that had once healed wounds in seconds now worked at a glacial pace, muscles remembering movement after millennia of atrophy. Each step was agony and triumph combined. "You disapprove," the Emperor said, not looking at his Captain General. "I serve," Valoris replied. "Approval is irrelevant. But you think I am making a mistake?" It was not a question. The Emperor could read the custodian's thoughts if he wished, but he had always respected the 10,000 enough to let them speak freely. One of the few groups he did. Valoris chose his words carefully. "Master, I have stood watch over your throne for 4 centuries. I have seen the Imperium's darkest hours and its brief moments of grace, and I have learned that truth, while noble, is not always strategic." The Emperor turned to face him, leaning heavily against a support pillar. "You sound like Guilliman. The Primarch is wise in the ways of governance. He understands that the Imperium you envision and the Imperium that exists are separated by 10,000 years of accumulated necessity." Valoris paused. "Master, if you denounce the Imperial cult, half the Imperium will believe it is a test of faith. A quarter will think you are possessed or replaced by a demon. The remainder will fragment into 1,000 interpretations, each claiming to understand your true meaning. Then they are fools." "They are human," Valoris corrected gently. "And humans require meaning. The Imperial cult, for all its flaws, provides that meaning. It tells a factory worker on a hive world that their suffering has purpose. It tells a guardsman charging into certain death that their sacrifice matters. It tells a mother watching her child taken for the tithe that the Emperor watches over them." He took a breath. "Is that a lie? Yes. But it is a lie that keeps them fighting when rationality would demand surrender." The Emperor was silent for a long moment, his hand pressed against the pillar, golden energy radiating from his palm and slowly repairing the ancient stonework. An unconscious gesture. He had built the Imperial Palace stone by stone during the Unification Wars. Even now his power sought to restore it. "The Inquisition," he said abruptly. "Tell me about the Inquisition." The change of subject was deliberate, but Valoris recognized it for what it was. The Emperor processing, calculating, searching for solutions. "They are your witch hunters, Master, rooting out heresy, mutation, and Xenos influence across the Imperium. They operate with absolute authority, answerable only to themselves and, theoretically, to you. How many innocents have they killed?" "Billions," Valoris said without hesitation. "Possibly trillions. The Inquisition believes in preemptive purging. If a world shows signs of chaos taint, they will order exterminatus. If a population witnesses demonic incursion, they will sterilize the survivors to prevent corruption from spreading. They are ruthless, paranoid, and often excessive." "And necessary?" Valoris hesitated. "That is the question that haunts every inquisitor worth their rosette. Master, I have seen them save systems through swift action. I have also seen them destroy worlds that could have been saved. The Inquisition is a blunt instrument wielded by individuals with absolute power and no oversight. Some are saints. Many are monsters. Most are something in between." The Emperor pushed away from the pillar and took another step. His coordination was improving, psychic energy supplementing physical weakness. "I created them, did I not? After the heresy, I established the framework that would become the Inquisition. Malcador the Sigillite formalized it with your blessing, yes. Then I am responsible." The Emperor's voice carried a weight of grim acknowledgement. "Another tool that became a weapon. Another safeguard that became oppression." He looked at Valoris directly. "Summon the local representatives of the Ordos. Ordo Malleus, Ordo Hereticus, Ordo Xenos. I would speak with those who execute judgment in my name. Master, the Inquisition is decentralized. There is no single authority to summon. Each Inquisitor operates independently. Then summon those currently on Terra. I know there are always Inquisitors on Terra. This world is too important for them to ignore. The Emperor's tone brooked no argument. And Captain General, when they arrive, do not tell them why I wish to speak with them. Simply bring them to me. Valorous bowed. As you command. He turned to leave, then paused. Master, if I may ask, what do you intend? The Emperor's expression was unreadable. I intend to discover whether the Inquisition serves humanity or their own interpretation of my will, and then I will pass judgment. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, because both of them knew what judgment from the Emperor might mean. The Inquisition had operated for 10 millennia, believing themselves above reproach, answerable only to a silent God. They were about to discover that their God was no longer silent, and he was very, very angry. Valorous departed, leaving the Emperor alone in the throne room with the dying machinery that had held him prisoner for so long. The Astronomicon still burned in the sky above Terra, but its light flickered now, uncertain, unstable. Without the Golden Throne's full support, maintaining the psychic beacon required active concentration from the Emperor himself. He could do it. His power had always been sufficient, but it meant he could not rest, could not fully dedicate himself to the 1,000 other tasks that beckoned. Another constraint, another prison, different from the throne, but a prison nonetheless. Malcador, he whispered to the empty air, speaking to a friend 10,000 years dead. You warned me that the Imperium would become a monster. I should have listened. No answer came, only the hum of distant machinery and the weight of an empire built on his sacrifice, waiting to hear whether their God would save them or condemn them. The Inquisitors arrived within 18 hours, which told the Emperor much about their surveillance capabilities and paranoia. 7 of them assembled in one of the palace's lesser audience chambers, lesser being a relative term as the room could have housed a cathedral. Each wore the rosette that marked them as speaking with his authority, though none knew they were about to face him directly. Inquisitor Lord Gesme Ka of the Ordo Hereticus arrived first, her crimson power armor marking her as a former sister of battle. Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Malleus followed, his Terminator plate inscribed with wards against demonic possession. One by one they gathered, witch hunters, demon slayers, Xenos purgers, each representing decades or centuries of ruthless service. They expected a summons from the Captain General, perhaps an inquiry into activities on Terra, perhaps coordination for some upcoming operation. They did not expect the doors to open and reveal the Emperor himself, walking with slow but certain steps, his presence filling the chamber like an ocean fills a cup. All 7 dropped to their knees instantly, but the Emperor noted the differences. Ka's genuflection was pure religious ecstasy. Covenant's was tactical, acknowledging superior force while maintaining combat readiness. Inquisitor Voke of the Ordo Xenos kept one hand near his bolt pistol, even while kneeling, suspicious even before his god. Rise, the Emperor commanded, and they obeyed with varying degrees of shock still written on their faces. You are the Inquisition. You carry my authority into the darkest corners of the Imperium. You root out heresy, destroy demons, purge the alien. You are judge, jury, and executioner for humanity's enemies. We serve only you, Master, Ka breathed, her voice trembling with devotion. Do you? The Emperor's tone was mild, but the psychic pressure in the room increased. Then answer me this. How do you determine guilt? The question hung in the air. The Inquisitors exchanged glances, uncertain if this was test or genuine inquiry. Covenant spoke first, his voice electronically modulated through his helmet. Guilt is determined through investigation, interrogation, and spiritual scrutiny. We examine evidence, test for warp taint, and apply the principles of the Imperial Creed to— "The Imperial Creed I never authorized," the Emperor interrupted. "A religious text based on worshipping me as a god, which I explicitly forbade." "Continue." Covenant hesitated. "Recalibrating. Master, the Creed provides moral framework for identifying corruption. Without it, how would we distinguish heresy from mere dissent?" "An excellent question." The Emperor began to pace, his movements growing steadier with each step. "Let me offer you a scenario. A planetary governor questions the ecclesiarchy's demand for increased tithes, arguing that his people are starving. He suggests the local cardinal is corrupt. The cardinal accuses the governor of heresy. The Inquisition is called. What do you do?" Inquisitor Voke answered this time, his weathered face betraying decades of hard decisions. "We investigate both parties. If the governor is truly guilty of heresy—" "Define heresy in that context," the Emperor pressed, "questioning the divinity of the God Emperor, refusing rightful tithes, spreading doubt among the faithful. So questioning corruption is heresy. Demanding accountability is heresy. Choosing to feed starving citizens over gold-plating a cathedral is heresy." The Emperor's voice rose, and cracks appeared in the marble floor beneath his feet. "Tell me, Inquisitor, how many governors have you executed for choosing their people over the ecclesiarchy?" Voke's jaw tightened. 17, Master, and each time I saved those worlds from falling to chaos. When faith weakens, the warp seeps in. When authority is questioned, civilization collapses. I have seen it happen. I have watched governors who only wanted to help their people make compromises that led to demon incursions, to whole populations pledging themselves to the ruinous powers because their leaders were compassionate instead of faithful. The Emperor stopped pacing. "And how many of those 17 governors were simply corrupt administrators who you executed before they could actually fall to chaos? How many were guilty of nothing more than disagreeing with the ecclesiarchy's interpretation of my will?" Voke faltered. "Master, we cannot wait for certainty. By the time a world falls to chaos, billions are damned. We must act on suspicion, on the smallest signs of corruption. It is better to purge one innocent world than allow one corrupted world to damn a sector." "Better for whom?" The Emperor's question was soft, dangerous. "Better for the Imperium? Or better for the Inquisition's reputation as the ultimate authority that cannot be questioned?" Ka stepped forward, her faith giving her courage the others lacked. "Master, we do your work. Every heretic we burn, every demon we banish, every Xenos we purge. It is all in your name. We are your sword against the darkness." "You are my sword." The Emperor's psychic presence flared, and every Inquisitor staggered. "I never asked for swords that could not distinguish between enemy and innocent. I never authorized religious persecution. I built the Imperium on science and reason, and you have made it a theocratic nightmare where questioning doctrine is a death sentence." "Because doctrine keeps us alive," Covenant shouted back, and his courage, or desperation, was remarkable. "Master, with all respect, you have been absent for 10,000 years. We have fought wars you cannot imagine. We have faced enemies that would have destroyed humanity if we had waited for proof, for evidence, for rational certainty. The galaxy does not permit rationality anymore. It permits only survival." The Emperor stared at the Inquisitor for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "You are not wrong. The galaxy has become more hostile than I ever intended. But that does not excuse what you have become. The Inquisition was meant to be humanity's shield. Instead, you have become another threat, one that murders my people as efficiently as any Xenos. What would you have us do? Voke asked, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. Master, tell us how to protect humanity without authority. Tell us how to stop chaos without faith. Tell us how to maintain an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds without fear. Give us another way, and we will follow it. The challenge was clear, and the Emperor recognized it for what it was, not defiance but desperate plea. These inquisitors, monsters though they might be, believed they were doing necessary work. They had become brutal because brutality was the only language the galaxy understood, and perhaps they were right. The thought sickened him, but the Emperor had lived too long to deny uncomfortable truths. The Imperium he had built would have been devoured by now if not for the ruthless pragmatism of groups like the Inquisition. I will give you this, he said finally. Continue your work, hunt heretics, banish demons, purge Xenos threats. But know that I am watching now. Know that every execution, every exterminatus, every act of necessary brutality will be seen and judged. And if I find that you have become the very monsters you claim to fight, no rosette will save you from my judgment. The threat was clear, and the Inquisitors accepted it with varying degrees of relief and dread. All except one. Master, Inquisitor Covenant said quietly, if you denounce the Imperial cult, as rumor suggests you intend, the Inquisition will fracture. Some will follow you, some will declare you possessed, and some will decide that faith in the God Emperor is more important than the man who was Emperor. We will have civil war within the Inquisition itself. The Emperor met his gaze. Then choose carefully which side you will stand on, Inquisitor, because the war is coming whether you wish it or not. Robute Guilliman returned to Terra on the second day of preparation, his arrival announced by the thunder of strike cruisers breaking through the atmosphere. The Lord Commander of the Imperium had been waging war in the Segmentum Pacificus when word reached him. Encoded Vox transmissions, astropathic messages screaming through the warp with unprecedented clarity, rumors spreading like wildfire through Imperial Navy channels. The Emperor walks. Guilliman had not believed it at first. He had stood before the Golden Throne too many times, had witnessed his father's continued imprisonment, had felt the psychic whisper that was all the Emperor could manage. But the messages persisted, and the Astronomicon itself seemed to pulse with renewed vigor. So he had abandoned his campaign, left Lord Commander Dante in charge and raced back to Terra at maximum warp speed. Now he strode through the Imperial Palace corridors, his armor of fate gleaming, the Emperor's sword sheathed at his side, accompanied by a full honor guard of ultramarines. Custodians guided him not to the throne room but to the Hall of Leng, a strategic planning chamber that had once housed the War Council during the Great Crusade. The Emperor stood at the center of the hall, examining hololithic projections of the Imperium, 1,000,000 worlds rendered in light, with threat assessments and supply lines and crisis reports scrolling past in overwhelming detail. He looked up as Guilliman entered, and for the first time in 10,000 years, father and son stood face to face as equals, as living beings, not corpse and supplicant. Robot. The Emperor's voice carried warmth that Guilliman had not heard since before the heresy. My son, Guilliman's practiced composure cracked. The Primarch who had held the Imperium together through sheer will, who had faced down demons and heretics and the crushing weight of administration, fell to one knee, not from protocol but from overwhelming emotion. Father, you're truly awake. Stand, my son. We have much to discuss and little time for ceremony. The Emperor gestured at the hololithic display. I have been reviewing your reports. The Indomitus Crusade, the Primaris Marines, the attempted reforms of the Administratum. You have done remarkable work under impossible circumstances. Guilliman rose, but his expression was guarded nowadays. And yet I sense a but coming. No but, only recognition that you have been fighting a war on two fronts, against the Imperium's external enemies and against the Imperium itself. The Emperor manipulated the hololithic controls, and the display shifted to show the ecclesiarchy's holdings, the Inquisition's fortress monasteries, the territories where imperial cult influence was strongest. You tried to introduce reason into a system built on faith. You tried to reform institutions that view reform as heresy, and they have resisted you at every turn. Because they fear change more than extinction, Guilliman said bitterly. I have watched supply convoys meant for war zones get diverted to cathedral construction. I have seen competent administrators executed for suggesting efficiency improvements that contradicted thousand-year-old procedures. I have fought demons that were less irrational than the Imperium's own bureaucracy. The Emperor nodded slowly. And you blamed me for it. When you first stood before the throne after your resurrection, you looked upon what the Imperium had become and thought, my father built this nightmare. Guilliman's silence was answer enough. You were right to think it, the Emperor continued. I made mistakes. The imperial truth was too rigid. I dismissed the human need for meaning beyond mere survival. I believed reason would triumph over faith, and I was catastrophically wrong. He turned away from the hololithic display to face his son directly. The Imperium you inherited is the result of my hubris and humanity's desperation, and now I intend to address it. By denouncing the imperial cult. Guilliman's tone was flat. Father, I understand the impulse. God knows. He stopped, grimaced at the unintentional irony. I share your frustration with the Ministorum, but this will trigger civil war. The faithful will not simply accept your word. They will rationalize it, reinterpret it, or reject it entirely. So the High Lords have informed me. So the Inquisition has warned. So my own Captain General has cautioned. The Emperor's expression hardened. And yet the alternative is to allow the lie to continue, to permit the imperial cult to grow stronger, to feed the warp entity that wears my face, to keep humanity trapped in superstition for another 10,000 years. The alternative is pragmatism, Guilliman countered, his strategic mind engaging with the problem. Father, I have spent a century trying to reform the Imperium through incremental change. It is slow, frustrating work that requires compromises that sicken me, but it is work that preserves stability while advancing progress. Your proposed broadcast would be, he searched for words, it would be the opposite. Revolutionary change that destroys stability in hopes that something better emerges from the chaos. You think I should lie? The Emperor's voice carried an edge. Continue the deception? Let them worship me? I think you should be strategic. Guilliman stepped closer, his towering Primarch frame still dwarfed by his father's psychic presence. Father, truth is a weapon like any other. It can be used precisely or it can be wielded as a bludgeon. What you're proposing is the latter. A galaxy-wide announcement that shatters faith will cause more harm than the faith itself currently does. You sound like you've accepted the imperial cult's necessity. I've accepted reality's necessity, Guilliman shot back. I don't have to like it. I wake every day disgusted by what the Imperium has become. But I also recognize that we are fighting for humanity's survival, not its ideological purity. If the faith keeps them fighting, if the prayers give them hope, if the belief in your divinity prevents despair, then perhaps that is the price we pay for survival. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The hololithic display continued its rotation, showing crisis after crisis, war after war, the endless grinding machine of imperial survival. You have grown wise, Robute, he said finally. Wiser than I was at your age, wiser perhaps than I am now. He returned his attention to the display. But wisdom alone will not save the Imperium. It requires something more. What? Guilliman asked. A choice. The Emperor manipulated the hololith again, and it zoomed out to show the entire galaxy. The Imperium's million worlds, the chaos-held territories, the Xenos empires, the warp storms and tyrannid hive fleets and Necron tomb worlds. The Imperium can continue as it is, slowly dying from internal rot while fighting external threats. Or it can transform, risking civil war for the chance at renewal. There is no middle path, my son. No compromise that satisfies both survival and progress. Then we're damned either way, Guilliman said quietly. Perhaps. The Emperor turned back to face him, but I did not wake from 10,000 years of torment to accept damnation without resistance. In 3 days I will address the Imperium. I will tell them truth. And then we will discover whether humanity deserves to survive, or whether my dream truly died with Horus. Guilliman stared at his father, at the being who had created 20 demigods and thought he could reshape humanity through will alone, at the man who had been proven catastrophically wrong but still possessed the arrogance to try again. And the Lord Commander of the Imperium made his decision. Then I will stand beside you, Guilliman said, not because I think you're right. Not because I believe this will end well, but because you are my father, and the Imperium needs to see that the avenging son supports the Emperor, even when he believes the Emperor is making a mistake. For the first time since awakening, the Emperor smiled. It was a tired smile, weighted with grief and grim determination, but genuine nonetheless. That is all I can ask, my son. The third day arrived with an atmosphere of dread hanging over Terra like a shroud. Across the Imperium, trillions had received word through official channels and rumor alike. The God Emperor would address his faithful. Some believed it was a test of devotion, others feared judgment. Most simply waited in breathless anticipation for a miracle they had prayed for across generations. In the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor stood before the most powerful Vox array ever constructed, a device that would amplify his voice through the Astronomicon itself, broadcasting psychically and electronically to every corner of the Imperium simultaneously. Tech priests labored over the machinery with religious fervor, their augmetic hands trembling as they made final adjustments. This was history. This was prophecy fulfilled. Guilliman stood to the Emperor's right, arms crossed, his expression carved from granite. To the left, Captain General Valoris represented the Custodes, witness to what might be the Imperium's salvation or its death sentence. Behind them, the High Lords assembled, some hopeful, some terrified, all powerless to stop what was about to occur. The ecclesiarch had attempted one last intervention that morning, throwing himself at the Emperor's feet and begging for reconsideration. The Emperor had simply stepped over him and continued toward the broadcast chamber. The message was clear. The time for debate had ended. "Master," the lead tech priest announced, "the array is prepared. The Astronomicon stands ready to carry your words to all humanity. We await your command." The Emperor placed his hand on the Vox control, and golden light flared from his palm into the machinery. The device, already blessed and sanctified by 1,000 rituals, suddenly became something more, a conduit for pure divine will, if such a thing could exist from one who denied divinity. Across the galaxy, people stopped. On forge worlds, manufactorums ground to silence. In guard trenches, soldiers ceased fighting and looked skyward. In hive cities, billions knelt in the streets. On space marine battle barges, Astartes paused mid-combat. The psychic pressure was undeniable. Something vast was about to speak, and reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The Emperor opened his mouth, and his voice reached into the mind of every human being in the Imperium. "I am the Emperor of mankind. I have been called your God, your master, your salvation. Today, I will tell you the truth that has been hidden for 10,000 years. On a million worlds, people wept or gasped or simply froze in shock. The voice was not what they expected, no thunder of divine judgment, but something more terrible. It was human, tired, ancient beyond measure, but recognizably, undeniably mortal. I am not a god. I have never been a god. I am a man who sought to unite humanity under reason and science, who believed that superstition and faith were chains that held our species back from greatness. I failed. My hubris led to civil war, to the corruption of my sons, and to my imprisonment upon the golden throne for 100 centuries. In the Sanctum Imperialis, several of the High Lords looked as though they might collapse. The ecclesiarch was openly weeping, though whether from joy or devastation, none could say. The Imperium you inhabit is not the one I intended. You worship me in temples built on the corpses of my dreams. You fight wars in my name that I never authorized. You have transformed my vision of enlightenment into a theocratic nightmare where questioning doctrine is heresy and faith has replaced reason. Across the galaxy, the reactions varied wildly. Some collapsed in existential crisis. Others doubled down on their faith, convinced this was a test. Many simply listened, struggling to reconcile the voice in their heads with 10,000 years of religious conditioning. But I will not lie to you by claiming the Imperium's faith is meaningless. I have watched you for these long centuries, trapped and helpless but conscious. I have seen your prayers, your sacrifices, your desperate hope that something greater protects you. And I have witnessed your resilience, humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender even when extinction seems inevitable. The Emperor's voice softened, carrying a weight of reluctant acknowledgement. The faith you possess has kept the Imperium whole when it should have shattered. The imperial cult, which I despise, has provided unity when humanity should have fragmented into warring factions. Your belief in my divinity has created a psychic bulwark against chaos, even as it feeds something in the warp that wears my face. You have made me a god through sheer force of collective will, and I cannot simply undo that by declaring it false. Guilliman's eyes widened slightly. This was not the speech he had expected. His father was adapting mid-broadcast, responding to the reality rather than ideological purity. So I offer you this truth instead. Believe what you must to survive. If faith in the God Emperor gives you strength, then keep that faith. If prayer brings you comfort, then pray. But know that what you worship is not me. It is the best of humanity itself. The courage, resilience, and hope that you project onto my image, that is what sustains you. That is what makes you strong. The words hung in the psychic ether, and across the Imperium, people began to breathe again. This was not the denunciation they had feared. It was something else. Permission to believe, but with awareness of what that belief truly represented. I am awake now. I walk among you once more, and I will guide the Imperium not as a god, but as the architect who must repair what he built poorly the first time. There will be changes. The ecclesiarchy will be reformed. The Inquisition will be held accountable. The administratum will be forced toward efficiency. These changes will be painful, but they are necessary. The Emperor's tone hardened, becoming the voice of absolute authority. To those who would resist in the name of orthodoxy, I am the orthodoxy. To those who would declare this message heresy, I define heresy. To those who would claim I am possessed or false, stand before me and test that theory. I welcome martyrs who believe their faith stronger than my reality. The threat was unmistakable, and across the Imperium, rebellious thoughts died in minds that suddenly remembered exactly who they were considering defying. Humanity stands at a precipice. The enemies that surround us grow stronger while we weaken from internal decay. We cannot afford 10,000 more years of stagnation. We will change or we will die. There is no third option. The Emperor withdrew his hand from the Vox control, and the psychic pressure that had held the Imperium in thrall began to ease. But his final words echoed across every world, every ship, every human mind. The Emperor protects, not as a god, but as a guardian, not through prayer, but through action, not with faith alone, but with reason, courage, and the refusal to surrender. If you would survive, then stand with me. If you would oppose me, then prepare for judgment. The choice, as always, is yours. The broadcast ended. For a moment there was only silence, the sound of 1,000,000,000,000 souls processing what they had heard. Then the galaxy erupted, some in celebration, some in outrage, some in confusion. But none could deny that everything had changed. In the Sanctum Imperialis, Guilliman finally uncrossed his arms and nodded slowly. That was better than I feared. It was compromise, the Emperor said quietly, and his voice carried disgust at the necessity. But you were right, Robute. The galaxy does not permit ideological purity, only survival. Then what now? Valorous asked. The Emperor turned toward the chamber's massive windows, looking out over the sprawl of Terra. In the distance, sirens were already wailing, riots beginning, celebrations turning violent, the fractures starting to show. Now, he said, we discover whether compromise was enough, or whether chaos will ensure we never get the chance to rebuild. As if in answer, the sky above Terra split open, and the first demon ships began their descent. The warning sirens came too late. Chaos had been waiting for this moment, the instant when the Emperor's full consciousness would be occupied with the broadcast, when his attention would be divided across the entire Imperium, when Terra's psychic defenses would be momentarily weakened by the sheer effort of reaching every human soul simultaneously. The ruinous powers had coordinated, setting aside their eternal rivalries for this singular opportunity. It was not a full demonic incursion that would have required a warp rift that even chaos could not create through Terra's layered protections. Instead, it was something more insidious. Possessed ships, chaos space marines who had hidden in the outer system for months, sleeper cults activated across Terra itself, and a massive psychic assault designed to destabilize the Astronomicon. Guilliman was moving before the alarms finished their first wail. Valorous, secure the palace approaches. I need 3 companies of custodians at the Eternity Gate immediately. He activated his Vox link. All Ultramarines forces, battle protocols Epsilon 7. This is not a drill. The Emperor stood motionless at the window, his eyes tracking the demon ships as they burned through Terra's atmosphere. His psychic consciousness was still partially extended from the broadcast, and he could feel the chaos assault on multiple levels. The physical ships descending, the psychic corruption spreading through the planet's lower hives, and something else, something vast stirring in the warp itself. They are coming for me, he said quietly. All 4 of them. Not in person. They cannot manifest fully here, but they're champions. Their greatest servants. This is their answer to my awakening. Then we kill them, Guilliman stated flatly, drawing the Emperor's sword. The blade ignited with azure flame, a weapon designed specifically to destroy demonic essence. Father, you should return to the palace's inner sanctum. Let us— No! The Emperor's voice carried absolute finality. I spent 10,000 years as a prisoner while others fought in my name. I will not hide now. He raised his hand and psychic lightning arced between his fingers. Besides, my son, they did not come merely to kill me. They came to prove that my awakening changes nothing, that the Imperium is still powerless before chaos. We must demonstrate otherwise. The first demon ship crashed into Terra's surface, 30 kilometers from the palace, its impact visible even from their position. The explosion bloomed upward, and from its heart emerged something that should not exist in real space. A greater demon of corn, 15 meters of brass and blood and infinite rage, followed by a tide of lesser demons and chaos marines bearing the World Eater's colors. Engron's children, Guilliman observed grimly. They seek to recreate the siege of Terra, but with their fallen primarch's spiritual heirs leading the assault. Then let them try. The Emperor strode toward the chamber's exit. Valorous, you have command of the palace defenses. Robut, you will lead the counter-assault. I will face the Demon Lord directly. Father, you're still recovering, Guilliman protested. Your physical form is stronger than it was yesterday and will be stronger still tomorrow, the Emperor interrupted. But more importantly, the Imperium needs to see me fight. They need to witness that their Emperor, God or not, stands between them and annihilation. This is not about strategic efficiency, Robut. This is about symbols, about showing chaos and humanity alike that I have returned. Guilliman understood immediately. The broadcast had been words. This battle would be demonstration. The Imperium needed both. They moved through the palace like a storm given purpose. Custodians fell in around them, their guardian spears ready. Space Marines from a dozen chapters, Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, Blood Angels, even a small contingent of Space Wolves assembled in the palace's outer precincts. Word spread through Vox networks and psychic whispers. The Emperor walks to war. By the time they reached the Eternity Gate, the massive fortification that had held against Horus himself, 500,000 defenders had mobilized, Imperial Guard regiments, Sisters of Battle, mechanized armor, artillery positions, all converging on the approaches to the palace, while overhead, Navy fighters engaged the demon ships in desperate aerial combat. The Emperor stood atop the Eternity Gate's ramparts, and his presence alone seemed to stabilize reality. Where demons attempted to manifest from psychic rifts, his will crushed them back into the warp. Where chaos corruption spread through the defending troops, his psychic light burned it away like morning sun dispersing shadows. But he was not merely defending. The Emperor raised both hands, and golden lightning exploded from his palms. Not the diffuse psychic pressure he had used in the palace, but concentrated annihilation made manifest. The lightning struck the approaching demon horde, and greater demons that had terrorized battlefields for millennia simply ceased to exist, their essence scattered beyond recovery. For the Emperor! The cry went up from 1,000 throats, and the defenders surged forward with renewed fervor. Not because they believed in a god, but because they had seen their god, or the man who had inspired that belief, demonstrate his power against the darkness. Guilliman led the vanguard, the Emperor's sword cutting through Chaos Marines with contemptuous ease. Beside him, Captain General Valorous and the custodians fought with the precision of warriors who had trained for 10,000 years for exactly this moment. The Space Marines provided overwhelming firepower, their bolters thundering in disciplined volleys that tore through demonic flesh. But the cornate demon lord was undeterred. It carved through Imperial defenders like they were paper, each kill feeding its strength, its axes dripping with blood that burned reality itself. It was making directly for the Eternity Gate, directly for the Emperor. Come then, the Emperor spoke, and though he did not shout, his voice carried across the battlefield. Come and test yourself against the one your master fears most. The Demon Lord roared its acceptance and charged. 20 meters of ceramite-clad Space Marines tried to intercept it and were shattered aside. Artillery shells exploded against its form and barely slowed its momentum. It was fury incarnate, the purest expression of Khorne's rage, and it wanted the Emperor's skull for its master's throne. The Emperor descended from the ramparts to meet it, and the two collided in an explosion of psychic and demonic energy that vaporized everything within 50 meters. When the light cleared, they stood facing each other, ancient anathema and manifestation of violence eternal. The demon struck first, its axes moving with speed that defied its massive frame. The Emperor blocked with bare hands wreathed in golden flame, and where his skin met demonic brass, the metal began to crack and corrode. They traded blows that would have killed titans, psychic force meeting demonic essence in a contest of fundamental principles. The demon was rage, the Emperor was will. Rage was powerful, rage was primal. Rage had fueled countless victories across millennia. But will was eternal. The Emperor's fist drove through the demon's chest, and golden light exploded from the wound. The creature screamed, not in pain, for demons do not truly feel pain, but in existential horror as it felt itself being unmade. Not banished temporarily to the warp, but erased. The Emperor's power was destroying the demon's true name, the fundamental concept that allowed it to exist. "Tell your master," the Emperor said, his voice echoing with terrible finality, "that I am awake, and I remember every insult, every corruption, every human soul his servants have claimed. The debt will be paid." The demon dissolved into nothing, and its destruction sent a psychic shockwave through the warp that every chaos worshipper in the system felt like a knife to the soul. The remaining demon forces wavered, their courage, such as demons possessed, failing in the face of their champion's annihilation. "Purge them," Guilliman commanded, and the Imperial forces swept forward in a tide of righteous fury. Not because they worshipped the Emperor as a god, but because they had witnessed what he could accomplish, because they had seen that the Imperium, for all its flaws, still possessed the strength to face chaos and win. The battle raged for 3 more hours, but the outcome was never in doubt after the Demon Lord's destruction. By dawn, Terra's skies were clear, the Chaos forces destroyed or driven back into the warp. The cost had been significant. Thousands of defenders dead, entire districts of the palace complex damaged. But the victory was undeniable. The Emperor stood among the ruins of the battlefield, his form splattered with ichor, and his own blood from wounds that were already healing. Around him, survivors knelt or simply collapsed from exhaustion. He looked out over them, these humans who had fought because he commanded it, who had survived because he had stood with them. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor felt something approaching hope. In the aftermath of the Battle of Terra's Gate, as it would come to be known, the Imperium found itself at a crossroads unlike any it had faced since the Horus Heresy. The Emperor's broadcast had reached every corner of human space, his words dissected and debated by trillions. Some clung to their faith more fervently, interpreting his message as divine permission to believe. Others struggled with the cognitive dissonance of a god who denied his own divinity, and a few, a precious, dangerous few, began to ask questions that had been forbidden for 10 millennia. The Emperor did not return to the Golden Throne. The ancient device had served its purpose, keeping him alive through humanity's darkest hours. But it was also a symbol of everything he despised about the Imperium, a monument to suffering and stagnation. Instead, he established his presence in the Hall of Leng, where he worked alongside Guilliman to reshape the Imperium's future. The Astronomicon continued to burn, maintained now by his active will rather than the grinding sacrifice of 1,000 psychers daily. It was exhausting work, but it was chosen labor rather than imprisonment. The reforms came swiftly and brutally. The ecclesiarchy was restructured, its power curtailed, its most corrupt elements purged. The Inquisition found itself answerable to direct imperial oversight for the first time in its history. The administratum's endless bureaucracy was streamlined, not eliminated, for the Imperium was too vast for anything less than massive administration, but made accountable. Competent leaders were elevated. Incompetent ones were removed. The changes were painful, resisted at every turn, but they happened because the Emperor himself enforced them. Yet the Emperor had learned from his first attempt at empire building. He did not demand perfection. He did not expect humanity to abandon faith overnight. He accepted that the Imperium would remain deeply flawed, that compromises were necessary, that progress would be measured in decades rather than days. It was a bitter lesson for one who had once believed he could reshape civilization through sheer will, but it was a lesson he finally accepted. Guilliman watched his father's transformation with cautious optimism. The Emperor was not the distant, uncompromising figure from before the heresy. 10,000 years of torment had taught him humility. Not weakness, but the recognition that even he could not control everything. Father and son worked together now as true partners, their combined wisdom forging something neither could have achieved alone, but the galaxy remained hostile. Chaos had been repelled at Terra, but the ruinous powers would return. The Tyranid hive fleets still advanced. The Necrons continued their awakening. The Imperium's enemies had not disappeared simply because the Emperor walked again. If anything, his return had made humanity an even greater target. Yet for the first time in 10 millennia, the Imperium faced the future with something it had nearly forgotten: genuine hope. Not the desperate, praying hope of those with no other option, but the determined hope of those who knew their leader stood with them. The Emperor was not a god, but he was the architect of humanity's greatest achievements, and he had awakened not to a perfect empire, but to one that needed him more than ever. On Terra, in the shadow of the imperial palace, a new monument was erected. Not to the god emperor of religious fervor, but to the man who had built the Imperium, failed, learned, and returned to try again. The inscription was simple, written in the emperor's own words from his broadcast. The emperor protects, not through prayer but through action, not with faith alone but with reason, courage, and the refusal to surrender. And across the Imperium, humanity read those words and found in them not divine mandate but human determination. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it was even better. The Emperor stood before that monument one evening as Terra's sun set over the palace complex. Guilliman joined him, and for a long moment father and son simply watched the city below, the endless hives, the teeming billions, the vast machinery of civilization that depended on them both. "Do you think it will work?" Guilliman asked quietly. "The reforms, the changes, all of it?" The Emperor considered the question. Once he would have answered with absolute certainty. Now he offered only truth. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we will try. And if we fail, we will try again. That is what it means to be human, the refusal to accept extinction without resistance." Guilliman nodded slowly. "Then we try together." "Together," the Emperor agreed. And in the darkness of the 41st millennium, where there was only war, two figures stood against the dying of the light, not as God and servant, but as father and son, united in the desperate hope that humanity might yet deserve to survive.